Welcome. Thanks for watching. Today I'd like to explore Emacs completions and particularly completion styles. My target audience is Emacs users that are using standard Emacs Minibuffer completions. And this is based on my understanding of Emacs completions after having spent some time working with it. So feel free to leave a comment if you have suggestions or improvements. First, let's agree on what these completions are. When you're providing arguments to Emacs, you provide fragments. You enter fragments of text, and Emacs completes those, matches those to full command or file paths or whatever. And the beauty of this is that it's faster and easier for the user. You don't have to enter full command names or full document names. You enter a fragment, Emacs completes it, so it's faster and easier. My focus here is on completions in the mini buffer. There are also completion of symbol names in ordinary buffers. For example, if you're coding and you want to know what the function name is or the variable name, that's a different kind of completion. Here we're working just with completions in the mini buffer. So what are some of these completions? You use these all day long, so let's just clarify what they are. Let's look at 4. If you want to run a command, mx find file, you type something, Emacs is completing that. It's showing you different options that you might mean. If you like one of those, you pick it, and you hit return, and it executes it. If you want to switch buffers, I've got a couple of buffers open here. I type foo, it completes that with stuff that matches foo. Same thing with find file. I'm at my root directory, my home directory. I type foo, it's finding those files and it's suggesting how I might want to complete that. And finally, if you want to get help from, I'm typing Control-H capital R. If you want to get help in the info package from the info documents, you want to enter a command name, a manual name, and it's completing that for you again. So you want to run a command, you want to switch buffers, you want to find a file, you want to get some info, you're using completion. So this comes up all the time. You're always using completion. All right, I want to distinguish between the completion UI and completion styles. The styles are what you give it a fragment and it's going to match it to targets. Those are the styles, and there's maybe 6 or 8 of those in Emacs. And then once those targets are decided, the UI is handling how that's presented to the user and how you go about picking one of those. So it's presentation versus matching. I mostly want to talk about the styles, but just to clarify this, the standard completion UI for Emacs, let's turn off Vertico. And we're going to do that find file thing again. Go back to our notes here, and you see that it doesn't pop open a vertical buffer and doesn't expand the mini buffer. I have to hit a tab, and then it's going to give me choices. It's going to pop open a completions buffer, and it's going to give me choices, and I can type in there and do completion. So that works. That's the standard Emacs completion UI. I'm using a vertical completion package here called Vertico, which is very nice. And again, when you enter the mini buffer, it's automatically expanding the mini buffer and giving you choices. So that's the UI part of it. But mostly what I want to talk about are the styles. So the styles is that the user configures Emacs with a list of styles that you want to use. And there are 2 variables that you can look at for this. The first one is the A list, which gives you a list of all the styles. So if we look at this variable, you can see that it's got this list: Orderless, Emacs 21, Emacs 22. So these are the styles. This is the list of all the styles available. And I've got that list here. So Orderless is something that I installed. Otherwise, these are the ones that come with Emacs. Basic is like the basic one that you probably want to use. Substring is a nice one. And you can look at these different styles and decide which one you want to use. And then there's this completion styles variable. And this is where you tell Emacs which of those styles you want to use and in what order you want them used. And so in that, for those early example that I was showing you when I was doing completions, I was using this list of completion styles: basic, substring, and orderless. And so that's how you set it. You know, somewhere in your configuration, you tell it what styles you want to use. All right, so if you're giving it a list of styles, which one is the one that decides the completions that you see? And what Emacs does is it starts at the front of that list and it tries each style. And the first style that gives results, those are your results. So the first style that produces results wins. So let's see that. Let's do another demo here, demo 2. Let's show that the, as I said, we saw that my list is basic, substring, and orderless. So let's try to find a buffer. If I hit an F, you see that it's completing only buffers that start with F. There are other buffers. If I type 00, there's no buffer that starts with 00, so it has shifted to the substring style. Right, if I do F, 00, this is the basic style, and as long as it's matching at the front of those targets and it's producing some results, that's what it's going to use. It's not matching anything that has 00 in it that doesn't have an F in the front. But if we type 00, then we see we're matching a foobar down at the bottom, and it's matching those letters in the middle. Here's all the things that end in EL, have EL in it anywhere. So that's the substring matcher. It's looking for bar here. It's looking for bar anywhere in any of the targets. And then orderless, if I type bar foo, see, orderless, doesn't have to be in the right order. It's looking for some number of substrings in any order in the targets. And that space there is configurable, but that's what separates the substrings. So it's basic, then substring, and then orderless for the way we have it configured. All right, so how do you know what each one of those styles does? As I said, there's 6 or 8 of them. There's an info page here that has basic, partial. It describes each of the styles. And you can look at that, substring, flex, initials. And it describes how it works. It gives some examples. Maybe a better way is to just try it. And so what I've done is limit the completion styles to just one style and play with it and see what it does. And so we're going to do that here. We are going to set and test a single style. We'll start with basic, then we'll use substring, and you can do this for any one of those 6 or 8. You know, flex, you want to try flex, you want to see how it works. You can do the same thing with flex and play with it, and you'll see how it matches. And so this will be less of a mystery. All right, let's go over here. Here's demo 3. So I'm going to set our completion styles to basic. I'm also going to override all of these 3 categories here with basic. And I'm going to talk about this in a minute. What is this override? But for now, what I'm trying to do here is to set everything to basic so that there's no other style coming in here to confuse things. And again, I'm going to try to find a buffer. I'm going to do a switch buffer. If I type F, this is what we saw before. You get those choices. As long as you're matching in the front, it'll give you the target. But you see that there's no substring matching. I type O, it's coming back with nothing. And so basic is whatever fragment I type has to match, you know, console. If I type console, no, there's got to be an asterisk in the front of that. It's got to exactly match the beginning of the target. Another thing to mention here is that if you put an ending fragment, you see that doesn't match. But if you back the point up, so that you're splitting that fragment into two pieces, and the left half matches the front and the right half matches something in the tail, then it'll match. So I don't know why that's useful. I wouldn't want to type something and then back the point up in order to make it match. There must be a reason for that. If you know the reason, you could put it in the comments, but know that if you shift the point, it'll change what matches and what doesn't. All right, so that's just the basic style. So now we're going to shift to just the substring style. I'm going to evaluate this chunk of code here. And now we can see that our completion style, if we look at this variable, is substring. So if we do that switch buffer again, we do foo. It's matching on the front because that's a substring, but it's also matching a foo bar, and so that's in the middle. So we know that the first thing it's doing here is not just, this is not basic, because if it was basic, it would not be matching that last one, that a foo bar. And it also matches OO, but it doesn't match. You can't put another substring here. There's only one substring. So one substring anywhere in the target, and it'll match. Okay, so that's the way I've done this to get a handle on how each one of these behaves. So you could put flex in here instead of basic, try it again, type some stuff, and see what it does. All right, so that's demo 3 here. Uh-oh, I'm getting lost here. All right, so as I said, looks like there are 6 styles built into Emacs. Orderless is the one that I installed, so that's an additional one. And again, you can go read the documentation on each one of these. Flex, for example, here's an example of flex. If you type foo when you're using this flex matcher, it's going to match Frodo and this one as well because it's got FOO in it. So that's a flexible matcher. You can go look at the documentation on these other ones. And plug them into that code that I showed and see how it works. That's the best way to get a handle on it. All right, this part is interesting. So in addition to the completion styles variable that you set, Emacs will prepend additional styles by category. What does that mean? These extra completion styles are prepended to the list that you defined. They don't replace that list. They're adding styles to the front of the list, so those are going to get tried first. Emacs has a set of default styles by category, but you can override those defaults. So this is a little confusing, but basically there are 3 mechanisms here. There are the completion styles that you set, that you want to use. And then Emacs has some defaults, depending on what you're looking for, whether it's a file, a buffer, or something else, that it's going to prepend. And if you don't like those defaults, you can override them. All right, what are the categories? There's a couple, like maybe 6 or 8, it looks like. 3 that are interesting appear to be file, buffer, and info menu. And so if you're looking for a file, the style for that category is going to be in effect. If you're looking for buffers, the style for that category is going to be in effect. So there are 2 variables here that control this. As I said, there are defaults and there are overrides. And let's look at this default. So this is what the value is. So if you are doing something with email, it's going to add this substring style to the front of the list. If you're doing something with buffers, it's going to add basic and substring to the front of the list. So if you don't provide category overrides, then these are going to be the styles by category. So if you're doing something with buffers and you don't provide an override, Emacs is going to stick basic and substring on the front of your completion styles list. So if your completion styles list was orderless and you're doing something with buffers, your actual list is going to be basic, substring, orderless. It's going to prepend those other two to the front of the list. The defaults aren't customizable, but again, you can override them. So what are the categories for those three we talked about? File, buffer, and info menu. File doesn't have a default, so it's not going to prepend anything for that. But these other two, it's going to prepend basic and substring. And then you can override. Let's look at this variable. We overrode this to be substring in one of our earlier demos. We set this all to be substring. So for file, buffer, and info menu, the override is substring. So you provide these category styles to override whatever Emacs has as the default. In demo 1, we didn't provide any overrides. We set that to an empty list. And so we were getting the defaults prepended. In demo 3, we picked which style we wanted, and we used that as the override. So we had our completion styles list and the override set to the same single style. And so we were isolated to just that one style. So this is kind of important to know that Emacs is tagging these styles on the front. So let's look at a couple of things here. In demo 4, we are going to set the category override to nil. So we're not going to supply any kind of an override or style. And then we're going to look at this function, which is in minibuffer.el code. And we're going to use that to see what happens if we don't provide an override. All right, so here we are. Completion category overrides empty. We're going to evaluate that. And this is that function that is in minibuffer.el. We're going to execute this. We'll see that there's nothing for files. For buffer, it's basic and substring. And for info menu, it's basic and substring, just as we expected. And then for demo 5, we're going to set our style to basic. We're going to set the override to orderless. And we're going to show that now it's going to tell us that the override is in fact orderless. And we'll see that orderless completion, see we're setting the style to basic, and then we're going to override that with orderless. That's going to put orderless in the front. And so we're not going to get any basic completion. We're just going to get orderless completion. All right, let's try this. So we're going to evaluate that. All right, so I type FO. I should get if this was the basic style, I would only be seeing the stuff that started with FO. And as you can see, we're getting a foo bar, we're getting info, and if I type something else here, this is obviously the orderless matcher here, orderless style. And there's no way to get to the basic style because orderless is on the front of that list, and it's going to do matching. It's going to supersede basic. And so the way we've written this, we've put orderless as the override. It goes first, basic is second. We're basically not going to see the behavior of basic. I don't remember whether I showed this, but these are all going to be orderless down here. Because we set them to orderless right here. All right, so that's the category defaults. This next demo is category override prepends to styles. They don't replace the styles. So we've seen this, but just to demonstrate, we are going to set the style to orderless. We're going to set the override to basic. And we'll see that you get both basic and orderless. We're not overriding the style. All right, so I evaluated that. Let's switch buffers again. And you see that we're back to basic. As long as we match the front, it's matching just the front and nothing else. But if we want to put something else in there, this is the orderless matcher, so we're getting both. First it tries basic. If basic produces results, that's all we see. If basic doesn't produce results, then we get the next one, which is orderless. Okay, so the takeaway from this default override piece, if you don't want basic and substring styles for buffers and info menus, then you need to provide an override. Because if you don't provide an override, Emacs is gonna, that default's gonna kick in. And if you're looking for buffers or something in the info system, you're gonna get basic and substring on the front of your list. And it's good to know that piece where we were trying to test these styles. If you don't know that Emacs is prepending styles, it's not going to behave the way you expect. You think you're testing one thing, but in fact, those styles are on the list, and so it's confusing. All right, if you want to learn more about this, you can look at the help variables for the variables that I've listed above, or you can look at the minibuffer.el, which is accessible from those variables as well, because that's where they're defined. You can just click on minibuffer and it'll take you straight to the code. And there's a piece in there where you can see the where it does the prepending and deletes duplicates, and that's where this behavior comes from. All right, so in summary, I'm suggesting that you play with the completion styles, those 6 or 8 of them, to see how they work. You know, use them in isolation and see how they work, and you decide which ones you like, which ones you want to use. And then once you've decided which styles you want, you're going to set your completion style variable to a list. The list that I'm using is, again, basic, substring, orderless. That seems to be a nice combination. And set your completion category override if you want to prevent Emacs from prepending those defaults that it wants to put on there. If you're using the ones that I just mentioned, basic, substring, orderless, you don't have to worry about the override because it's going to prepend stuff that's already on the front, and so that's going to be a no-op, and so you should be fine. And if you want a completion UI, consider one of these completion UIs like Vertico. If you want something on the UI piece different than what standard Emacs, I showed you that it opens a completion buffer, and that's different than Vertico. Vertico expands the mini buffer and gives you a vertical list that you can navigate with the arrows. All right, that's completions, Emacs completions in the mini buffer. These are things that I didn't know until I dug into it. In particular, the prepending thing, I didn't find that anywhere in the documentation. So I hope this is helpful.